Sir, we thought we would change it up a little bit. Instead, our panel is going to write the questions for the audience to answer. For AUSA writ large and General Brooks, sir, distinguished guests and friends, thank you so much for being here. And I told the boss earlier in the week that this was going to be the most important panel. You can text, voting will start right after my panel's finished. You can text BF549 and then you'll be able to vote for our panel. So that didn't go over as well as I thought it would. But it is indeed my pleasure to be here today, and it is a high-powered panel, and I really look forward to the discussion. Thank you so much for allowing AUSA for allowing us to be here and have this opportunity to discuss communications, interoperability, and reliability during contingency operations. I really think, Sir Admiral Thomas, I think really this is a great segue to your presentation, and thank you for that presentation earlier. I mentioned I am a missile defender, and I do believe we all serve in the same foxhole, and so it's important, I think, in today's world that we all are able to interoperate, and we certainly work that hard with our allies. I know General Karbler here, that's probably his biggest piece. I think we pretty much, in the missile defense business, believe the architecture is indeed the most important weapon system that we have. It senses the threat, it interrogates the threat, it plans a response, and ultimately commands the engagement for the fight. It's a tough proposition to put this capability together in any situation, and especially complicated when you consider that it's, again, not something that we'll do alone. It's something that we have to bring together all of our different systems. Now, we can do that. Industry does that. And, while we all may speak a different language, our systems do speak the same language in most cases, or we can put together a system that will do that. So it's important. I think that analogy works well for this discussion here today. Clearly, in crisis and a resulting crisis response, to be successful, we must thoroughly understand the problem, understand the communications architecture, the doctrine, the rules, the TTPs that govern those, and for all of the participants, those elements. But more importantly, beyond that understanding, we have to put that together. We have to put all of those elements together in a capable response, far beyond just understanding it and put it to good use. Certainly not a simple task. Challenges and or problems we may encounter are many. Some of those are leveraging the existing interagency organizations and establish information sharing for all. And we heard a great presentation about that yesterday in terms of HATR and how important that is and how strides are being made in that way. But it's a huge problem, and I think anybody that was involved in the operation in the Philippines understand that. Not having the country clearances to work through the issues on usage of spectrum for all of our systems, set up in advance, tested, trained to. The need to establish a network control center for mission command of all those forces and their assets, and then to bring in and accept in a fast way other users. And the potential for ultimately operating in a hostile environment from resulting cyber implications, and we all know that that's going on. To help get us through all those issues today, we've assembled really a tremendous panel of regional and international experts that will help us guide us through this. And joining us today, we've got some great leaders. And I just briefly introduce, we've got Lieutenant General Robert Ferrell. He's the U.S. Army's Chief Information Officer and G6. Major General James Walton, Commanding General of the 311th Signal Command and USAPAC G6. Major General Michael Shields, who's our Commanding General of U.S. Army Forces in Alaska. Rear Admiral Nancy Norton, she's the Director for Command, Control, Communications, and Cyber for U.S. PACOM. We've got with us a special guest here today, too, Colonel Jiro Hiroe, Director, Japan's Research and C4 Systems Division, Policy and Programs Department, General Staff Office, and then a great industry partner, Greg Glaros from SYNEXXUS. He's going to give a great talk to us as well today. So let's give them all a big round of applause, please. Our plan of attack is to first we're going to address PACOM. We're going to talk to the requirements in this arena from a PACOM perspective. Then from there we're going to go to a service, the Army, support of all warfighting commands and how that works. And then we'll go down from there to our own network, our enterprise here in the Pacific, the theater requirements, and then ultimately go into the operational commander, talk what's happening, how does this work in the field, and then get some perspectives of how it worked during Operation Tomodachi from a Japanese perspective, and then ultimately how our industry partner puts it together in that capability. So let's get started. Batting first today is Rear Admiral Nancy Norton. She has a wealth of experience in this arena. She's held every key information dominance billet that you would expect of an officer in her grade and experience, both ashore and afloat. Some key assignments include serving as the lead for C4 ISR and global response issues for the Navy's 2008 QDR office. She was the executive assistant to the Navy N6, deputy director for ISR capabilities in the Navy's N2, N6, as well as executive assistant to the vice CNO and then later to the CNO as well. Today she will set the stage for our discussion by giving us PACOM's approach for assuring command and control and interoperability. Please join me in a warm applause for Admiral Norton.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. First, I'd like to thank AUSA and General Sullivan and General Brooks for inviting me to participate. I also want to thank Admiral Thomas for being here this morning, because as I look out in the audience, I feel a little bit like a fish out of water, not a whole lot of Navy people here, so I appreciate that. Can we go to, there we go, next slide. So the mission of the J6 is to plan, integrate, synchronize, and direct cyberspace operations in support of the Commander U.S. PACOM's missions. And so as we look at that, what that means for Admiral Locklear is assuring command and control and assuring interoperability to support his whole range of missions, whether that's providing credible combat power or the much more likely and expected operations that we conduct every year in the PACOM theater, humanitarian assistance and disaster response. So at its most basic level, assuring command and control and assuring interoperability requires that our radios, our data links, our satellite connections, our network services, secure voice, video, and data work seamlessly with whomever we need to operate with and whatever forces the commander will need to command. In preparation for those full spectrum operations, to include HADR, the J6 mission is to ensure that the question of how do we communicate with our partners and allies is solved before a real-world operation, and in fact, before we even get to the Phase 0 plus that Admiral Thomas talked about. We do this through a whole series, a set of theater engagements and major efforts that include the PACOM staff, all of our service components, the services, and many other organizations across DoD. Starting with the probably largest one of our engagement opportunities is the Multinational Communications Interoperability Program, or MCIP, which focuses on support of humanitarian assistance and disaster response efforts. MCIP promotes the goal of HADR-related communications system interoperability through a yearly exercise known as Pacific Endeavor. Pacific Endeavor, or PE, is preceded by 3 planning workshops that lay out scenarios and execution issues, including workshops on spectrum, SATCOM, and cyber operations. The final week includes the Pacific Senior Communicators Meeting, which brings together senior communicators from nations throughout the theater, and Colonel Hiroe has participated in those as well, and a few others that are in the audience, I believe. Last year, that event was held in Thailand, and this year it will be held in Nepal. So each year it moves to a different host nation, and each of the planning workshops are done in a different nation as well. And that allows the host nation to maximize participation in Pacific Endeavor and the workshops, significantly helping to improve both the interoperability and the certification of interoperability of their systems at those workshops and exercise. We also conduct bilateral engagements with 9 separate partners in the theater. So when Admiral Thomas talked about the need for developing access and assured access with our partners, once we get to that assured access, we have to have assured interoperability, particularly with the partners that we know we're going to be operating with on any given operation. And so there are 2 command and control interoperability boards with each of these 9 countries every year, one in the partner country and one in the US, where we identify, discuss, and solve interoperability issues. This is where we deal with and tackle the much more complex interoperability issues, to include some of the IAMD issues that were asked about earlier with those partner nations. In conjunction with these venues, we conduct various functional working groups to address issues related to ComSec, tactical data links, satellite resources, and spectrum, including the Pacific Joint Frequency Management Office. An area of increasing interest and emphasis is on establishing interoperability, increasing information sharing, and assisting with training on information assurance and cyber defense development with all of our partner nations. This continues to grow and is an area that is in very high demand from our partner nations, where they want to start to develop their own forces, their own TTP, as they're developing their organizational constructs to handle cyberspace security. And this is an area where, in particular, we have leveraged our service component assets to really help provide this kind of engagement and workshops. We also develop strategic and functional plans, exercises, and contingencies from a C4 perspective, and ensure that the importance and the methods of operating effectively in cyberspace with our partners and allies is addressed in the staff planning process. We particularly focus on some of the degraded and denied environment requirements that have to be included in the plans as we work through those plans. So the question that Admiral Thomas was asked about, how do we deal with that? We specifically task each of the exercises to include degraded operations as part of the events in the exercises, and that's relatively new, and that allows us to help to develop our C2 thin line, or understand what we absolutely have to have even in a degraded or denied environment, and then to reinforce our ability to interoperate on that C2 thin line. Finally, the Multinational Information Sharing Program manages and promotes the various flavors of classified and unclassified communications through systems like SYNEXXUS, the Combined Enterprise Regional Information Exchange System, Releasable SIPRNet, Pegasus, the All Partner Access Network, or APAN, and integrating the mission partner environment into future development of the joint information environment. Next slide, please. So I'd like to talk briefly about the future convergence of JIE and MPE. Admiral Locklear requested about a year ago that PACOM be the focus area for JIE Increment 2, specifically to work to build a more agile and defendable network to connect with our partners. The U.S. will always respond to HADR and crisis operations with coalition partners. So developing a JIE architecture to assure that interoperability and improve information sharing with our partner nations is absolutely critical to our success in this theater. These partners will be the traditional ones that you see in the middle within DoD on NIPRNet and SIPRNet and other government agencies, and with well-established partners such as on SYNEXXUS. But you'll also have a lot of unanticipated or less consistent partners as well, such as NGOs that we interoperate with significantly on APAN, and very definitely you'll have the unanticipated mission partner where we haven't yet developed a dedicated network to communicate with. The 3 primary goals are to enhance mission effectiveness, improve security, and improve efficiencies. Some of the key aspects of this convergence of JIE in JIE Increment 2 are agile responsiveness, delivering the ability to create secure operational environments on demand for secure information sharing, by leveraging commercial solutions for classified to replace Type 1 crypto requirements. We'll be able to enable interoperability with these additional mission partners and the unanticipated partners. Resilient transport, creating a common mission network transport with less tunneling to allow it to be more reliable. Single security architecture, which reduces vulnerabilities in the security complexity, making it more defendable. Agile virtual enclaves to provide a new level of security by creating protected information domains running within a network. Reducing the information technology infrastructure by collapsing networks and in virtual desktops, and providing access to any network enclave from a single end user device, even multi-enclaves on one screen. We can manage all of this and access all of this from the concept of a single pane of glass, as you see here in this illustration, which would support all of these JIE objectives. So that's where we're going in PACOM. This is a big focus area for us in the J6 and for Admiral Locklear. And all of this really does support the communications interoperability that we're talking about this morning. So I thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. We really appreciate the great work that PACOM's doing in this regard, especially in the joint information environment. When you look at the requirement for sharing information, agile, you heard keywords, agile, defendable, and reliable. And that's certainly necessary, especially in terms of when you're talking about consequence management, your crisis response. I mean, you've got to have it together from the get-go. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Lieutenant General Ferrell. As I said earlier, he's our Army's Senior Chief Information Officer in G6. He works directly for the Secretary of the Army. In that capacity, he sets the strategic direction and objectives for the Army's network and supervises all Army C4 and IT functions. He has an extensive experience background in both staff and command assignments, including, as you would expect, battalion and brigade command, and recently as Commanding General of Communications Electronics Command and Aberdeen Proving Grounds. Key staff assignments include Director, C4 Systems, United States Africa Command, Director, Army Modernization Strategic Communications, RKIC within TRADOC, and also serving, interestingly, as a Senior Fellow on the Council of Foreign Relations. General Ferrell will lay out for us, from a service perspective, how the Army supports its warfighting commands. Please join me in a warm welcome for General Ferrell. Thank you.
Let me adjust the mic a little bit. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. I would just tell you right up front, it is great to be here in the Aloha State and away from the five corners of the Pentagon there in Washington, D.C. The weather out here is much nicer. Well, I'd like to also thank General Sullivan and AUSA for inviting me out here to speak and provide some remarks, as well as General Brooks. Great panel, good panel members. And what I'd like to do today, having been in the job now just a little bit over 90 days, is give you a little bit about the perspective of the Army. And they will tell you that I know just about all the answers that you may come up with when it comes to communications. I'll set the stage by, first of all, sharing with you how the network and IT modernization is nested with the Army's vision for a stronger land power, strategic land power. Then I'll discuss my priorities that I set forth, that I've shared with Jim Walton and the other commanders within the Army on laying out the end state for the developing of the modernization for our IT structure. Then I'll end with talking a little bit about some of the items that are near and dear to you here in PACOM. So if you can go to the next slide. I have only one slide. So I'll start with the Army's vision. Starting at the top, General Odierno, our 38th Chief of Staff of the Army, considers that Force 2025 a wave point, where 2020 being the near term, and he urges all of us to view that way forward in the broader context of strategic land power and the global network. Now, of course, I'm responsible for the overarching and achieving the second element of this context, delivering a network that enables, one, a more globally responsive force capable of decisive actions. The expectation is to achieve this by 2020. A leaner, more lethal expeditionary force than today, for Force 2025, and then for beyond 2025, a fundamental change of force uniquely enabled and organized to conduct an expeditionary maneuver. So what's the significance of linking these two elements together? The Army's Strategic Land Power Initiative, how we see land power when it comes to the joint force abilities to translate military actions into strategic success for the nation, which includes the following. One, maneuvering strategically to gain competitive advantage prior to conflict. And here in PACOM, their engagements and interoperability with partner nations shape this advantage. Expeditionary maneuvers, rapid response across the range of military operations, ensuring access of data and a distributed operations, including degraded operations, a network is imperative. And last, a global land power network, all key drivers in the Force 2025 and beyond. Now, having a global land power network that improves partnering, interoperability access, and responsiveness is critical. Understanding this dependency, the Chief has charged us, and what I mean by us, everyone here in the audience as well, to build a lighter communications so that we can be globally responsive, leaner, more agile Army, which also means that we have to build the interoperability capabilities up front. We also need to deploy with little to no notice, with the right amount of support necessary, which also means that we have to have a reach back via the network, not deploy personnel forward while using their expertise. Employ fewer personnel with the same or better combat power, and not to lose tactical overmatch. Essentially, in my mind, embracing technology to the edge so that we could never put the warfighters at a disadvantage. Now, as you look at the priorities that I have set for modernizing the network, I would say modernizing the network, IT, and communication systems to ensure that they are effective, secure, and efficient is tough for any organization. This is going to take the commands and the network teams across the Army and the department to make this happen. On the left side are my list of my priorities that I've shared. First, building the capacity. What we're doing is upgrading the IT infrastructure and legacy switches to handle more capacities with faster throughput. And what I mean by that right now at San Antonio is what we're starting in this initiative is developing the cloud, where we're going to increase the bandwidth at each post camps and station about 10 gigabytes and ride on a backbone that's 100 gigabytes. The second priority is only possible with the right capacity. We must modernize our IT infrastructure to leverage enterprise services across our formations. We can increase operational effectiveness by moving the data across to the DoD cloud and providing a single identity for you to access the information you need globally, anywhere, anytime. Under the priority of security and net ops, we are collapsing our network perimeter and making it more defendable. With increasing cyber threats, we can't afford not to. By implementing Joint Regional Security Stacks, JRSS, we reduce our attacks surface from over 700 points of presence on the internet to only 23 worldwide. To move the cyberspace operations forward, one of my priorities is to enhance Army's cyber capabilities, which is focusing on building the integrated cyber workforce to meet today's and tomorrow's requirement. They are independently linked across operations of signal, intelligence, and the CIOG-6 will continue to support TRADOC and the Army Cyber Command and 2nd Army to build greater abilities within the cyber teams. Last but not least is the signal regiment. As the Army changes and postures for the future, we must also do the same with our regiment. The workforce needed tomorrow must be built today, both military and civilians. As we access the forces to determine what is needed to support regionally aligned and engaged Army, and as we move forward into cyberspace operations, we are reviewing what we need when it comes to that cyber warrior within our ranks. Now, the bottom line is, to properly enable Army missions and to achieve the strategic land-power vision, the network must have increased operational effectiveness, improve security, and become more efficient. Our workforce must provide necessary support to install, operate, and maintain, defend, and protect the network from the enterprise to the installation to the tactical edge. Now, as you look at the center of this slide are the big Army outcomes. I'm not going to spend any time on that because they're really straightforward, as you can see and understand those. But I want to shift over to the right-hand side of the slide where it says PACOM IT focused areas. On the right, and you've heard a lot of that from Admiral Norton, J6, I would just say that the first big thing is the JIE, Inc. 2. The network must be robust enough to integrate and interoperate securely with theater and global access points, and on the ground and remotely in order to provide the required C4SR and cyber capacity. Implementing the JIE Inc. 2, including the mission partner environment, will support PACOM's unique mission requirements within the theater of operation. PACOM J6 has a great roadmap plan and is closely working with the DoD CIO as well as the J6 there to make the Inc. 2 a reality. The second item on there is the IT upgrades and network modernization. My office is currently working with the POE IES and the USAPAC G6 to validate and refine Phase 2 through 4 USAPAC Mission Command facilities. We are currently scheduled to place 2 JRSS stacks here in the PACOM area of operation, and that is projected, I believe, in FY16. That's what's projected to come here in the theater. And I've also had a NetCom team, survey team come here to Hawaii earlier this year to assess the unified capabilities and the MPLS switching implementation for requirement to allow that cloud and capabilities here in the Pacific theater. Additionally, I'm headed to Korea next to kind of sit down with the commanders to kind of look at the Yongsan relocation down to Humphreys to look at their requirements when it comes to interoperability, and then also capabilities for the C4 requirements. Next item on the chart is the ROC and US C4 interoperability. I've had a chance to visit Korea, sit down with both communicators and work with them on interoperability issues. And I would just tell you from that discussion, I've developed a team to kind of work with them one-on-one to ensure that it's not a policy issue or not a technical issue, that we can kind of, again, reduce that friction and gray area when it comes to interoperating with our ROC Army. I'm also scheduled to go see Major General Shin, the G6 of the ROC Army, who visited me back in the Washington area in February to again further that discussion of how we can reduce that interoperability challenge. You know, I would just say that, again, standing here before you, sharing some priorities of the CIO G6, and then coming here to this theater, my first OCONUS visit, provides me good opportunities to, again, see the issues, take the issues, and kind of work them and find the recommended solutions so that we can move forward in this theater. Thank you very much.
Hey, sir, that was great. I really appreciate especially the discussion on the global land power network. When we look at that, especially in the context, one of the hats that USAPAC has taken on, General Brooks has taken on as the Theater Joint Force Land Component Commander, we really saw it play out in the Philippines You know, that assignment came right just almost essentially about a week before that tragedy occurred. And then in short order, you see the need to really be able to put a network together that brought the Marines together, that brought the other players together with the United States. So, sir, that's is very appropriate, and I appreciate that presentation. We're going to now neck it down a little bit. We're going to go to our senior communicator here in the region here with General Walton, who will talk to us a little bit on a theater's perspective. As such, he has responsibility for all facets of Army communication within the Indo-Asia-Pacific region. He comes to us with a wealth of experience in both active and reserve Army organizations across multiple disciplines in both command and staff assignments. His command assignments include both brigade, battalion, and brigade command, as you would expect, followed by a DCG assignment as the 63rd Regional Support Commander, and then later as Commanding General of the 335th Signal Command and RCENT G6 in Camp Arifjan. Most previously, he served as the Director, Chief Integration Office of the Army Chief of Information Office and G6. He is uniquely qualified to address the requirements and, more importantly, the necessity to be interoperable and build reliable communications within this theater of operations. Please join me in a warm welcome for General Walton.
First, I would like to thank AUSA General Sullivan for hosting LANPAC, as well as affording us the opportunity to provide perspective on C4I interoperability. Indeed, the money question, as Admiral Thomas referred to in his opening presentation today. So far, Admiral Norton and General Ferrell have provided perspectives from the combatant command as well as the service. They've given us a framework for today and direction and vision for the future. My perspective is that of a service provider, and that is delivering capability today, tomorrow, and the day after, which is what we do by training with the capabilities that we have in exercises, improving our C4I foxhole as we can, and also establishing an eye toward the future in which we want to set the conditions for success. Success being deploying enterprise solutions, mission partner environment, joint information environment, thickening the network, or developing capacity. So when I say a focus on the near term, our objectives may be a bit more modest, but they're equally important. So it's such things in exercises as ensuring that we have interoperable tactical communications, and that's as simple as radios that talk to one another. Preferably secure, but not necessarily, because service is provided across the full spectrum of operations, be it a contingency operation where you would have a mission network, to a humanitarian assistance mission where the network communications may be unclassified and truly wide open. So across the spectrum, but nevertheless there's an imperative on being interoperable. Another example would be simple collaboration capabilities, such as having email, chat, SharePoint site on which you can share collaboration products. And then a final example would be establishing a common operating picture. An operationally relevant picture depending on the mission demands, so that there is a common baseline and shared situational awareness between all partners. These are the capabilities on which we focus today, but also recognize that for the future, we have to be involved in modernizing our infrastructure across the AOR so that we can deploy successfully the capabilities for which we've been provided a vision and hopefully resourcing in the future to be able to achieve them. From a network provider perspective, a key dimension on which we focus is IAC&D, Information Assurance Computer Network Defense. Partners in an environment, depending upon the particular mission goals, will come with differing capabilities, differing interest in computer network defense. Any network provider, though, regardless of the mission, has to be concerned with the reliability, the availability, security of the network that they're providing. So we often use the exercise as an opportunity in which to reinforce the basics, which is user practices, and then also to look at a shared baseline of cyber capability, which includes such things as having common tactics, techniques, procedures, and operating processes. That would include incident response and management, cyber information assurance workforce training. General Ferrell touched on that one, to train the workforce today so that they're prepared for the challenges of the future, although in many respects the challenges of the future with respect to cyber are already here today. Examining our current network architecture to ensure that we have a defense in depth with respect to potential cyber events. Disaster recovery and continuity of operations. Obviously, some familiarity of that in the context of disaster relief, but in some respects, continuity of operations and recovery from a cyber event is even more challenging because there are questions as to the integrity of the entire network, not just those that may have been physically damaged in a disaster event. And then, of course, using exercises for white cell and exercise support. These are the opportunities that we would like to work with our partner nations, given the varying degrees of readiness, but also recognizing that given the full spectrum of capabilities, we must be prepared to work with all partners, all stakeholders across the PACOM AOR, depending upon what the particular challenge is. So as I look to the chart, we'll only speak to a couple of key points. And really the focus is on where we're going. Where we're going is working with our partners to ensure that we can establish shared situational awareness, to work with them to establish a baseline for robust network, robust network defense and preparation, to use exercises is the key venue, and there is a rich exercise schedule of PACOM joint events as well as select Army events in the TSCAP program. And then finally, to establish the conditions for the future, which is to undertake those improvements and prepare ourselves so that when we do improve the capabilities of the network, establish a JIE mission partner environment, or beyond that, to improve basic bandwidth capacity, that we're prepared to do so. With that, I think that I will try and give some time back to the operators so that they can provide their perspective. Key emphasis, though, the service provider's focus is today, tomorrow, and the day after, because if you don't have communications, you're just on a camping trip.
We're not going to be giving any time back. That's one thing my daughters will tell you. I don't ever stop talking, so stay tuned. Thanks for that, Jim. I really appreciate it, especially, this common cyber baseline that we talk about and where we're going with our allies and position ourselves, establish those conditions for the future. More and more of our engagements now with all of our partners in the region, cyber is repeatedly an area that everybody's coming to agreement on that we have to do more. So I appreciate the great work and the discussion on that, and it would be some good questions should follow from that, I would hope. I'm honored now to take this, unless we're going to go to our operational commander, our Army Forces commander in Alaska. So it's my pleasure to introduce Major General Mike Shields. He is, as a previous tremendous record, I'd encourage you to read his bio in the records. He's commanded at all levels, I would say, both battalion and brigade command and combat, and also just on multiple staff assignments. Most recently, he was the director of the Pakistan-Afghanistan Coordination Cell, J5 on the Joint Staff. Today, his organization, he has command of multiple combat units, including airborne and striker units, with approximately 14,000 soldiers and 2,000 civilians. He's well suited to discuss with us the challenges of preparing for deploying soldiers across a diverse spectrum, across in many cases, very distant environments with very different weather patterns for all of his forces. So I think he can really bring together, for us, shed some light on what it takes to have a communications plan to be able to talk and command those forces, especially as you look at, in some cases, like with the airborne unit, while they're en route, providing an early entry capability, having that early entry mission command. So please join me in a warm welcome for General Mike Shields.
Aloha, everybody.
Aloha.
I'd like to thank AUSA, General Sullivan, General Brooks, and team for hosting us. I think you've arrived as an infantryman when you get to talk about communications in front of a panel like this, and I know it's certainly going to be the highlight of my morning. I thought I'd focus on a couple things. We talked about early entry communications. I'll touch upon that a bit, but it isn't, just for a potential decisive action, but also in support of humanitarian assistance and disaster response. But I'm also going to talk a lot about some of the lessons we learned recently with Alaska Shield, which was the largest exercise our country's ever conducted based on an earthquake scenario in the state of Alaska. And I'm going to focus on the communications piece. We live in an environmentally challenged region of the world. In fact, 80% of the planet's earthquakes occur in the Pacific Rim. That was mentioned earlier. Over the last decade, China, the United States, Philippines, India, Indonesia constitute the top 5 countries that are most frequently hit by natural disasters. Alaska shares that same risk. 4 out of 5 earthquakes that are recorded in the United States take place in Alaska. Alaska averages between 400 to 700 earthquakes a week, 50 to 100 daily. Alaska also shares the threat of volcanic activity with our Pacific partners. The 1989 eruption of Mount Redoubt sent ash and debris nearly 45,000 feet into the atmosphere, which had major impacts on the city of Anchorage, the port, its population of nearly 300,000, and its lines of communication. So I'm sure you can appreciate the challenges in responding to both an earthquake, tsunami type event and a volcano event, which require different response options. USARAC forces possess rapidly deployable humanitarian assistance and disaster relief capabilities that can be invaluable in supporting disasters in the Pacific. We can extend aid to victims of natural or man-made disasters, both at home and abroad. If the military is to provide timely, effective assistance in the wake of typhoons, earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanoes, and tsunamis that beset the Pacific region, reliable and interoperable communications, they're not a luxury, they're a necessity. So, go ahead, change the slide. Good. I'd like to also highlight, too, from a communications perspective, that this moves into the unclassified effort, which is not common for folks that are used to working in NIPR, SIPR domains. And so when you're responding to an earthquake or natural disaster, we heard APAN discussed yesterday. We heard it mentioned again today, the All Partners Access Network. You're familiar probably with how USAHIDI has been leveraged in Africa and how it was leveraged with the Haiti earthquake crisis. So it's also an open source issue, not just an unclass issue. I'm not really going to dive into that too much other than to highlight that there's challenges we need to work through as we wrestle with the volume, literally drowning in data points in a scenario such as an earthquake, the ability to integrate, assimilate all that data, to analyze it, and then be able to make recommendations to our senior JTF and really our civilian leadership, which in this case was Governor Purnell from Alaska. Communications capabilities are integral to mission success for U.S. Army Alaska. Our diverse responsibilities include our role as USARPAC's Army Contingency Response Force. We provide the only airborne brigade task force in the Pacific. In order to execute the ACRF mission, we must integrate capabilities for seamless delivery of secure and non-secure communications. And that's from home station to the tactical edge. We're focusing our efforts on integrating cutting-edge tools and applications to increase operational flexibility. We'll talk about some of the secure and route comms piece, but there's also the integration of capabilities such as GRIP, BGANs, those types of things. One line of effort has centered on identification and mitigation of capability gaps. USARAC units leverage the Joint Communication Support Expeditionary capability here in Hawaii to conduct mission command and maintain situation awareness while en route to contingency deployment destinations within the PACOM AOR. Due to the vast geographical size of the Pacific regions, travel times are extensive. Next slide. Contingency deployment flight times within theater can exceed 18 hours. If you remember, the Airborne Task Force did the large movement to Australia for Talisman Sabre, conducted an in-flight rig and jumped into that exercise. Most recently was a 19-hour flight from Alaska to Thailand for Cobra Goal, 2 in-flight refuels, in-flight rig, jumped in for an HADR exercise, and approximately 24 hours later turned around and did the same operation back into Alaska. And then within a week, did not of the same scale, but a similar operation up in northern Alaska in the Arctic at minus 30 degrees. So when we departed, if you can imagine from a soldier human domain perspective, almost a 90-degree temperature change from boarding the aircraft in Alaska to jumping in Thailand. En route communications are critical to adaptive planning and exercising mission command responsibilities to include our allies and partners. We've successfully demonstrated this early mission command capability seen during Talisman Sabre and Cobra Gold. And in fact, I was routinely getting situational updates on my BlackBerry from the commander airborne as he's en route to the objective. Robust communications are required for USARAC's PACOM ACRF, but USARAC also has to be prepared to execute a disaster response mission in support of Joint Task Force Alaska, which is a standing JTF, and Northern Command. So you've got Alaska Command, which is aligned under PACOM, and you've got Joint Task Force Alaska, which is aligned under NORTHCOM. The second strongest earthquake ever measured struck Alaska in 1964. Next slide. We recently marked the 50th anniversary of that deadly earthquake with Exercise Alaska Shield 14, the largest exercise of its kind that the U.S. has conducted, with participation from Washington, D.C., all the way down to the tactical edge to the defense coordinating officers in the Joint Field Office. The exercise tested our ability to provide defense support to civilian authorities in the wake of a devastating 9.2 earthquake, numerous aftershocks, and tsunamis. The exercise provided great training and lessons learned, particularly in the area of establishing and maintaining critical communications in support of HADR, using my and General Handy's immediate response authority, and then follow on through the mission assignment process. These lessons have broad applicability given the frequency of natural disasters in the Pacific AOR. And just to kind of set a scene, provide a scene setter for the level of devastation, Anchorage, which is really the economic hub of the state, was over 60% destroyed. The ports of Valdez, Seward, others were rendered ineffective. Communications, landline, cell, internet, radio, all significantly degraded. And often we think that over the next several days or week that will get better. It actually gets worse. And so what gets shaken loose in the initial 9.2 will be exacerbated by the follow-on tremors and aftershocks. So the communications continue to degrade. How we thought we could actually communicate and then how we could actually inform the population really migrated towards radio in the initial onset of the disaster. And I'm not really going to talk much about it at the end, but ham radio also played a significant role in the response. Robust communications are required for that mission. We have to be prepared to provide disaster response for the Joint Task Force and for NORTHCOM. Our JBER ad hoc alert enterprise notification system, and you may be familiar with that. It's not unique to Alaska. It's a PACOM. It's under a PACOM and USARPAC larger program. Allowed us to notify both soldiers and their families quickly at the various command centers located throughout Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson to push voice messages, text to soldiers and their families in the event of a natural disaster or a significant event. We can also use it for phone and so on. This system is customizable for the command center to provide timely and accurate information and orders, if applicable, to specific users, leaders throughout the command. Currently, we have more than close to 14,000 subscribed. This worked well for initial warning. We've got some work to do to improve it for the future, but it's a great initial warning capability. We also have the Alaska Land Mobile Radio Network. It's part of a broader program as well. It's a statewide radio network that's comprised of two zones for us, Anchorage and the Fort Wainwright area, and approximately 125 repeater sites. The ALMAR provides a single shared and secure interoperable communication system for all emergency responders in the state. It's not a statewide system, but it does cover the majority of the state's road corridors and most population centers. USARAC maintains over 25 portable or mobile and desktop systems. These radios provide emergency services such as medical, fire, police, utilities, and administrative communications to all activities within the network and across the state, as well as a common statewide interoperability zone for use in disasters and with our cooperative partners. During Alaska Shield, we focused on finding ways to establish robust joint and integrated operations centers while supporting mission command. We employed a scaled approach, aligning the communication nodes to specific meaning a top-down driven communication link from JTF Alaska's JOC to the USARAC Home Station 24/7 Operations Center, where our Joint Force Land Component headquarters was initially stood up until it could be backfilled through the request for forces process with the 593rd Expeditionary Support Command. Kirk Ryan, I think, is sitting in here. He deployed from JBLM in support of this exercise. His staff, initially we fell in on the JCSE JOC, Expeditionary JOC, and then once Kurt got his Expeditionary JOC set up in the Elmendorf area, then we jumped the JFLIC to his Expeditionary JOC, and then Kurt became the Deputy JFLIC Commander at that time, providing an incredible capability to JTF Alaska. And then by extension down to the brigades, and we were able to use our tactical communications from our Charlie 307th Signal Company, which has a JTF deployable capacity, that we're able to immediately stand up, things like joint network nodes, command post nodes, to get that initial satellite connectivity at not only our principal command and control sites, but at our continuity of operations sites as well. So great support by the JCSC from Hawaii and the 593rd. But when you talk about communications, if you were to dig down and go even further, if you consider the Port of Anchorage really the decisive point for recovery, the 7th Transportation Brigade also deployed from JBLM to reinforce and establish their C2 node down at the port. That included they have a harbor, I'm going to misquote it, it's a harbor master company. So later when I talk about COP, it wasn't just our unclassified disaster COP that we built for situational awareness, but it also integrated things like GEECS data, AIS, CPOF, which was interesting when you consider that we largely operate CPOF in a classified domain. So now, how do you take it and leverage for a disaster in the unclassified domain? I'm not really going to talk too much more about that, but those are some of the friction points we were working through across the command, if you will. Successful applications of tactical communications packages provided connectivity, classified and unclassified, to hundreds of users from 12 DoD unit headquarters at 7 distributed command posts in order to collaborate with NORTHCOM, I-Corps' COIC, USERPAC, the Dual Status Commanders Headquarters, the State Emergency Operations Center, the interagency piece we were talking about earlier, and the Joint Field Office, where the Defense Coordinating Officer and the Defense Coordinating Element are located. Each of these command posts connected to the global information grid via satellite. I mentioned our JNN and CPN nodes earlier, and oftentimes it was commercial as well. We use several line of sight or H-close radio links to efficiently pass a high volume of data. A good example will be from the port to the JTF headquarters. We still have a lot of work to do in terms of in-transit visibility of disaster relief supplies. We got great support from NORTHCOM components, so essentially an amphibious readiness group, hospital ship, other capabilities were en route to Alaska, and being able to communicate and talk with them is really important. I also have, as the DCG of JTF Alaska, an emergency response vehicle, which is essentially secure and unsecure data, voice, video on the move. And so when I went down to the Joint Logistics Over the Shore effort down in the Port of Anchorage, I was able to bring up and talk to 3rd MEF planner via Tanberg from the vehicle and get an update on the progress of the ARG and so on. So having the ability to move to the decisive point in a disaster like this and still maintain UHF, VHF satellite connectivity is really important, so the ERV was valuable as well. These satellites help mitigate one of the challenges that complicate communications in Alaska. Yeah, that kind of gives you a good idea of the scale of the state and kind of the scope of the disaster, if you will. Next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about temperature. If you look over on the left on temperature, high elevation mountain ranges across a large landmass often preclude terrestrial line of sight communications. So what does that mean? FBCB2 gets challenging, and Blue Force Tracker with satellite angle is even more challenging. Line of sight limitations are compounded by harsh weather conditions and satellite system coverage limitations, which combine to make communications challenging in the Arctic. How does this affect situational understanding? For example, the volume of reporting that's coming in over multiple networks and the ability of a JTF to build a COP. Last fall, we started working with Google and others to build an unclassified COP to the point where we actually had it up. We leveraged Defense Connect Online in the unclassified domain to collaborate. We were able to have the National Guard headquarters plug in, State EOC, the Dual Status Commander, as well as multiple other distributed nodes. And through Defense Connect Online in class domain, we were able to share both the COP, user-defined operational picture, if you will, where you can select different shapefiles, layers, for that geospatial layer, for the visibility of not only the earthquakes and tremors, but data of the cell towers, the relay, what's required to bring the state back up to meet the governor's priorities. Line of sight limitations are compounded by the harsh weather. I mentioned that. We were able to build situational awareness, though, with all of our capabilities. We need to continue to work that, though, from a software and an analytical perspective, because literally to use the term we've heard before, our analysts were drowning in data with the volume of reports that were coming in. And in a situation like that with social network, once the internet starts to come back up online, what you're facing it's really information that's coming in via Twitter, Facebook, other means that is informing, DC is seeing it at the same time we're seeing it. And so sometimes we were getting reports from Washington or other areas where we hadn't necessarily seen it first, or we actually had better situational awareness on the ground based on our representatives from the state that were in those towns, Alaska National Guard. So it's a complex, challenging information environment once the internet comes back up and that service is provided. There are some aspects to operating in cold weather regions we had to address. Standard Army communication equipment that functions normally under more ideal conditions, let's call ideal, warmer than minus 25, often fails or becomes significantly degraded in extreme cold weather. And I know there's several countries sitting here that have equities and interest in operating in mountainous and extreme cold weather environments. Alaska Arctic Warriors have developed TTPs over time to address these problems, such as heat blankets for batteries, insulating personnel and equipment from the cold, makeshift thermal shelters for sensitive equipment. Additionally, efforts are made to prevent moisture from collecting on the equipment to avoid refreezing, which is a big problem. There are also significant human factor components to operating in extreme cold weather. For example, human exposure to the environmental conditions become a factor in mission accomplishment. And like Kurt talks about with his certification for the jungle and his requirements, we have unique certification requirements all of our soldiers go through every year to be able to not only survive in extreme cold weather to minus 40, minus 50, but to be able to operate and be effective at that temperature. A good example would be a huge demand signal for our rotary wing assets in this disk environment. It was the first thing using my immediate response authority that we pushed down to Anchorage from Fort Wainwright. A pilot set down in Alaska is a life or death situation because there may not be any immediate responders for hours. The ability of the pilots to survive at that temperature, to have the kit on board their aircraft, whatever the frame, is significant, as is their survival training. But we certify all of our soldiers every year to be able to operate in that type of climate. And so while the equipment may function at minus 30, minus 40, minus 50, there may be human factors engineering issues that make it very difficult, such as finger dexterity at that temperature. If you're required to manipulate or do something that requires finger dexterity, that could be severely degraded. So those are some of the things we need to think through. The most significant impact, though, to our comms is the look angle from the satellite. I mentioned that earlier. Next slide. Okay, that's it. So Spartan Pegasus, minus 30, Arctic jump, incredible capability. We leverage SkySat, you see that in the upper left, for extended communications, and we're working with other organizations for innovative solutions to answer our communications needs. But that's kind of it in a nutshell from Alaska Shield. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike. The early entry capability and establishment of a responsive mission command capability is huge for Admiral Locklear and execution of missions here in PACOM. So thank you for that. And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce COL Jiro Hiroe, who serves within the Japanese Ground Staff Office as the Director, Research and C4 Systems Division, Policy and Programs Department. Other key assignments he's had include command of the Western Army Signal Group from 2011 to 2013, followed by an assignment as the Chief of the Research Office, 1st Research Division, Ground Research and Development Command. He is well suited today to discuss with us bilateral communications as it unfolded, especially during Operation Tomodachi. And in that operation, he actually served as the Chief, the Bilateral Coordination Center of that organization at Camp Sendai. So please join me in a round of applause for Colonel Hiroe. Thank you.
Aloha, good morning, everyone. I'm Colonel Hiroe. I'm not a hero, but my name is Hiroe. I'm Chief of Research and C4 System Division, Ground Staff Office in Tokyo. 3 years ago, as you know, Japan was hit by mega earthquake and tsunami, and Japan Self-Defense Force conducted first ever Japan-US bilateral operation called Operation Tomodachi. I was Chief of Bilateral Coordination Center, which was set up on site at Camp Sendai, and I worked with 3MEF and US Army Japan. Please take a look at this. This is a famous emblem for Operation Tomodachi, provided by US forces, which shows strong relationship between Japan's self-defense force and US forces. It seems that the operation went well, but we got many lessons learned through that operation, one of which is necessity of interoperability between our forces and your forces. Now I will explain my experience during the operation and our current effort to enhance the interoperability between two forces, especially focusing on our land forces. This slide shows that communication tools in US forces headquarters on the left side and in Japanese ones on the right side. Please take a look at the equipment of Japan side, JTF-TH headquarters, and each division and brigade headquarters, which were main bodies to conduct rescue and reconstruction operation with SYNEXXUS and AUSA, were not able to establish common operational picture due to lack of compatible communication tools and systems. Furthermore, at the soldiers level, we couldn't communicate each other because we didn't have SOP, we hadn't conducted enough communication exercises due to lack of compatible radios. So most of our divisions and brigades requested us LNOs be exchanged, and fortunately, SYNEXXUS and AUSA kindly proposed us the LNOs exchange. For example, I sent 3 LNOs to Essex, which was a mothership of 31st MU, and AUSA sent several LNOs to 6th Division, whose AOR were totally devastated and conduct lots of operations bilaterally. I'd say they did good job. It's true. They are a major contributor for the Operation Tomodachi. However, I asked myself if it would be good for future operations. The answer is no. We have to improve our interoperability, and it's urgent. Next slide, please. This slide depicts our effort to establish common operational picture between US Army, US Marine Corps, and Japan Ground Self-Defense Forces. At corps level or regional army level, we've already made COP at Yamasakura exercises last December. We've got the position data of Blue Force and Red Force. Those data were provided by 1st Corps via SYNEXXUS. Now, at division and brigade level, we are planning to install software to our command system, which convert US data format used in your command system, such as CPOF, C2PC, to our data format. This is now under coordination and scheduled to be completed in a couple of years. As for common radios, we decided to install software to our radios so that we would be able to communicate with your radios. And one more thing, we've also decided to procure US ComSec devices for Japan Ground Self-Defense Force, US Army, and US Marine Corps secured communications. Now we are waiting for approval of National Security Agency, and we are getting good response from Pentagon so far. If we got the green light, our radios become fully compatible with your radios in a few years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Mr. Greg Glaros, Chief Executive Officer of SYNEXXUS. He is recognized as one of the nation's intellectual leaders in network-centric warfare implementation, information architecture, and options theory. His company, SYNEXXUS, is a system engineering company that pioneered data distribution systems and rapid fielding support for the services and other federal customers. Today, he will address the imperative of integration and operational access to and through the architecture we must all operate in. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Okay, look, I know I'm the last panel speaker in here, so we'll keep you awake. General, thanks for not mentioning my time in prison, as you mentioned earlier, on doing that in this Lenten season. Certainly, confession absolves all those sins, and frankly, the last time I was in trouble, I think the Army had won a football game.
We're not talking about that.
You're awake now. Okay, good.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, are there any other questions? So look, it's been 8 years since I've retired from service. It's been quite a long time since I've had the engagement with the defense industry and speaking in those parts. And my last role was a direct report to the Secretary of Defense, where he would wind me up twice a month and I'd go out and speak at these opportunities. But frankly, as I look in the audience, and I've talked to some of you, and I've talked to some of the panel members, there's a genuine disconnect right now between all the dedication and the determination and how you've honed your career today on your operational focus. And frankly, operationally, I think everyone is doing quite well, but no mention has been made of that last tactical mile, the boots on the ground, or the wheels on the road, and how you're communicating, how you're connecting, how are you sharing information at that element and right now. And frankly, in Washington, it's a procurement Ponzi scheme right now, as well as many of you may be looking at this, it's technical pornography. You'll know it when you see it, but frankly, you don't know how to get there in order to take care of the integration of all these platforms. What you're seeing up on the slide here is essentially all the entities that have had to be connected operationally in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have spent the last 8 years showcasing a method and a manner, both technically and operationally, of how to bring the last tactical mile, that wheeled vehicle, to turning in those trucks into cockpits. I spent my 20 years as a naval aviator, and frankly, I was astounded and shocked by the tyranny of absence of information in the vehicles except for radio communications. And that doesn't seem to really change very much. Next slide, please. One more. That's it, eh? I think there's two more. Yeah, keep going, one more. Or you got them hidden. Get something back up?
Don't comment about the football team anymore.
I tell you, just erase two of my slides, and that's how it worked. There you go. So here's one of the challenges. It's not bad. Here's one of the challenges of integrating the forces securely, and not just the forces of the vehicle. This is a wiring diagram of the Joint Light Tactical Vehicle. Right now, we are one of the leading C4ISR integrators on one of the platforms, with AM General in particular. We have done it before with Oshkosh's vehicles and force protections. Most of those were aftermarket kits, and frankly, the cost is 3 to 5 times what it should be when you do up front. The impact on that, as all of you know and involved in the planning of operations in this tyranny of distance in the Pacific Theater, is the cost of logistics. And that cost is so significant, I don't think any of you are the real bill payers. You don't know the impact of it. Last year alone, Apple spent $7 billion on global logistics to move their iPhones and iPads. What has the U.S. spent in that same period of time? Hewlett-Packard spent $3.5 billion improving just their laptop computers. Samsung and LG spent $1 billion just improving your LCD so that you can have a 4th generation view of the latest sports event. So this procurement Ponzi scheme that I see going on out there is spending little attention on this element of where your engagement is most involved so it can communicate to your operations centers so strategic decisions can be made. But frankly, it's not being done very well right now. Fortunately, in this program of record, there's attention being paid specifically to that, and that's a revelation, I think, that's occurring today that has not occurred in the past. But as you talk about a common operating picture, I'll offer you there's a cultural operating picture that has not been addressed, as well as the technical operating picture that can't be resolved in how you're still communicating on voice. As a former naval aviator, I flew the A-6 Intruder in Desert Storm, and all we had to offer was the communication between myself and my bombardier navigator as we held each other's hands in fear sitting side by side. In the F-18 later on in my career, it was what we called Top Gun comm brevity, certain words that had rich meaning to convey a message of our operational picture. Later on, we had MIDS, the terminals within the aircraft that shared data. Does that exist within your tactical vehicles that are deployed or with your individuals? And right now the answer is no, absolutely not, and focus should be paid on that. You as the operational commanders in the seniority you have should be screaming for the fact that you don't have that last mile taken care of. And frankly, I watch this on two sides in Washington, both being a business leader as well as a former operator, and wondering at what time in our lives is it going to come together. If you paint a picture out there till 2025, frankly, the industry is moving so fast, the pace of innovation is so quick, 2015 isn't resolved, so I don't know how you're going to think about planning to 2025, because so many things are going to change. Think about our world 10 years ago. The iPhone didn't even exist at that time, and that's giving access to a population out there where the speed of innovation is outpacing the speed of information right now. Think about that. Just today alone, 1,000 apps have been published and produced and is generating revenue for people every single day. Now you may say, hey, 900 of those are just games, but frankly, it's the ideas that it's generating and the applications it's providing to individuals out there, of which many of us are no longer attached to generationally. My last slide. So how do we make that complexity easier? Trying to deal with 35 nations, I sympathize with your problem, Admiral, but frankly, try and deal with 35 companies in the integration of a single platform, contractually, programmatically, and financially. We can't get our act together locally, so I asked, how are we going to do that strategically within this region and communicate with all of our partners out there as they're working with sometimes more sophisticated systems than us, or a mismatch in those communication paths and the data communications that's out there. And frankly, the answer for operating, and I understand in contingencies you have to go to thin C2 that's out there. You can't afford to be operating at any time down in that domain. We face that in the aviation world where the MiG-29, as we saw it in our day, was a pretty formidable opponent. But once we exploited that aircraft when the Berlin Wall fell, we found that our key discrimination in our competitiveness was our ability to share information between our aircraft and give us a kill ratio that far exceeded the sheer numbers they would throw at us. Information will protect you tomorrow, not additional armor. And if your perspective, because of your rank today, is simply because of the operational deployments of your garrison forces, you better start thinking about the tactical level of which those are the individuals who are giving you the situational awareness that has strategic implications. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Greg. Well, I mentioned at the beginning we were going to take any questions. I apologize, we've run out of time. So the panel members will be here afterwards, and if you have any questions, please come up and speak to them. Thank you much.